Okay, good morning or good afternoon, everyone, and happy Friday. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to today's PCA webinar sponsored by Deloitte. My name is Marty Reed, and I'm with PCA. Good morning or good afternoon, everyone. And now we're trying to go live as well on YouTube. Okay. And I just wanted to welcome everyone to today's webinar. We have a great panel of coaches for you all. Feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A box and we'll do our best to get to them. I want to welcome our moderator for today's panel, none other than Dan Helfrich. He is the CEO of Deloitte Consulting and former Georgetown soccer player. We have Coach Adia Barnes, and she's the head coach of the University of Arizona women's basketball team. And we have Coach Brian Weiss. He's the coach or head coach of Georgetown men's soccer team. Thank you all for being here today. All right, take it away, Dan.
Awesome, Marty, and PCA Nation. It's an honor for the three of us to be with you. For those watching live, for the many that'll join us on replay, I get the privilege to be the captain of the Deloitte Consulting team, a team of 70,000 or so people. And there's nothing we love talking about and thinking about more than leadership and culture. And so we're going to spend a bunch of time on that. And I always say I am a leader in training. And one of the things I'm always trying to do is learn from other great leaders. And frankly, I prefer other great leaders who aren't in business, but are doing it in other walks of life. And there's two I admire incredibly with me today, Adia Barnes and Brian Weiss. I'm a little closer to Brian, given that he's the head coach at my alma mater and a good friend. And I admire Adia from afar. Brian and I, Adia, aren't sure we're worthy of being with you today, but we can't wait to have the conversation. As opposed to a long intro, with the bios of both coaches, I thought I'd actually share what you guys have in common. So you both were really successful collegiate athletes. Adia was a much better player than Brian. You both had professional careers. Brian's was very brief. Adia's was very long in the WNBA. And you both, and this is super cool, you both in the earliest stages of taking over your current programs, made it to your university's first Final Four. And Adia last year, and Brian in 2012. And then the only thing Brian may have on you, Adia, is he did win a national championship 2 years ago. And so it's a good sign that that's coming soon.
I see all the jerseys on Brian's wall. That's intimidating. I don't have anything close to that. Oh my goodness.
So that's what you guys have in common, and can't wait to talk. So let's first. It is not profound to say culture matters. I think we'd all who get the privilege to lead organizations talk about culture. I'm curious though, Adia, when you think about building a culture in a program, how do you think about it? How intentional is it about what culture you want to build?
Well, for me, I was a first-time head coach, so I knew just being a part of championship teams, I knew what a good culture was, what a championship culture was. But when I was building it, I didn't really know what the right way was. So I just kind of said, okay, because when you're a part of it and when you're like instructing to lead it, I think it's very different. When you're a player, things are a lot easier than when you're a coach. So when I took the job, I just said, well, what are the things I can fix right away? And obviously we all get jobs because of a reason. If things are great, you probably don't get the job. So things weren't great at Arizona. The only thing that we could do was up. But I think the most glaring thing to me was, what is wrong? Like, why aren't we successful? So when I examined that, it all related to culture, in my opinion, from what I was used to. Because I came from a very different place. I came from the WNBA. Then I came from Washington, who I just went to the Final Four. And then I came here and I was like, wow, this isn't how it's supposed to be. But then here they didn't know what it was supposed to be like because they had never won. So I think for me, just starting internally, doing the small things. And for me, that was getting everybody aligned, getting everybody on the same page as me, and understanding, what's important. It wasn't about winning and losing at that time. It was about getting good people on the same page and doing things the right way.
So now that you've been coaching for 5 or 6 years, I think.
My 6 years gone by
This is
fast. It's 6 years as head coach.
it's year six as a head coach. So you've established a culture. How then do you think about whether the culture changes from year to year as the personalities change, as the success change, as the chemistry of the team changes? Sort of what stays in common and then what might shift during the course of a season?
So I'm in my first course here. Brian's probably done this before many times. So I'm just seeing the course happen. So came here, first couple of years really bad. I'd say I saw the first shift like my third year because I started to have more of my own kids that I recruited and we started to understand what it took to win. I saw the drastic change this last year and more of a change now. Because once we had a taste of success with the NIT, then it's like the buy-in was there. Then the next year was COVID year. We would have been a high seed in the tournament, but we didn't get to do it. So I didn't really see it all that year. I really didn't. It was such a unique, stressful year. So I saw it. I saw it last year. I saw that we didn't have a championship culture yet. We had a very good culture, but we didn't have a championship because we had never won championships. But now, after going and losing in the championship game, and being so close and all the stars aligned, we got lucky and all those things. This year, I see the result of it. So to me, we don't have a championship culture yet. We're close, but we don't have it yet. I think that when I've been on championship teams and it's a true championship culture, it is the players policing themselves. It's the coaches stepping in, but the players saying, and really the high level of accountability. We have a level of accountability. It's getting better, but it's not a high level. It is still people afraid to really tell people the truth. I mean, we have a couple people that will, but we don't have that consistent. So we are getting better at that. But from just going to the Final Four and having the success, the standards are so much higher now. There is more, a lot harder working players, doing a lot of extra work, just really kind of holding the freshmen more accountable and those things. But I think that, when you've never done it, I don't think you truly know what it looks like yet. So hopefully we'll do it and we'll learn that, because I could only say so much. They have to kind of do it as players.
So, Bri, I love the concept of a championship culture and the progress it takes to get there. Do you think you've arrived at championship culture? And, how do you think about how the culture of the Georgetown program has evolved and will evolve over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think the interesting thing about, you can sort of wait for a championship to say you're a championship culture, but I don't think you actually need to be there necessarily. You can have multiple teams, right? Like the year we won the national championship in 2019, we had it, everything was ticking over. But I remember going into that tournament, looking at the landscape of college men's soccer going in. I'm like, man, there's 8 or 10 teams that really got it right that year, that easily could have won it just the same. And I think a championship quality culture is maybe the word I would use, right? Like having it so that maybe you don't necessarily need to win the championship to then be tagged as a championship culture. But I think, the right people matter. And so what you inherit matters. I had the exact same thing, Adi is talking about, is like first 5 years, it's really hard. You're trying to figure out, like, what are the pieces needed? What's wrong? What do we got to change? What's right? What do you got to keep? How do you, and you talk about culture. It's like, well, what is culture? And a lot of it is a self-running machine, right? And that's where you sort of know you've got things right. And so what is buy-in? Buy-in to what? You're getting the right people. Well, who are the right people? Like, what are those guys? And I think it's like, when you really get it right, your existing guys teach and you do all that, right? The young guys come in, but at the end of the day, no matter where you are in your development of your organization or your team, if you have the right people, and so the question is, well, what is that, right? And so for me, it's like intrinsically motivated people. The people are going to go out and do the extra work, who want to do, from our point of view, the day off is something they don't like. The extras, the short sessions, they don't like. They want more, right? They always want to improve because they're hungry for that self-improvement. I'll use it from this context. When you recruit people, you want people who have that intrinsic motivations, like who that. But then the number of people that we take into our team that actually recruit us more than we recruit them is significant, like more than people I think maybe think. Obviously, we know they have qualities as players, there's talent, but we're really interested in the players and the people who really want to be here, really want to be here, because there's tough times. They're going to go through things, but they're here and they're coming in with I'm going to a place to be part of whatever that thing is and grow that thing versus, so is that mix of like, I want to grow myself, but they're also excited to go in and grow the team or the culture of the organization. So, that's where we're always trying to figure out, like, how do we continue to build on that and grow that with the right people.
So I'm curious. I want to dive into one particular element of culture. There's a coach that Brian and I had the incredible honor to get to know, and Adia, I'm sure you admired from afar, which is, Coach John Thompson, the legendary basketball coach at Georgetown. And one of his famous many expressions was something effective: don't let 8 to 10 pounds of air define who you are as a person. Talking about a basketball, I don't know, Brian, a soccer ball is probably 9 to 12 pounds of 9 to 12 pounds of air. The point being, the role of a coach, particularly at this formative part of a young adult's life, is about so many things, including, I've heard both of you talk about developing good leaders for life. So you're measured by success on the field, and you're two of the premier programs in your sports. You want to compete for championships. How do you think about the culture of developing great leaders for life, which to me is probably about everybody on that roster, not just the people who happen to be playing in the games when they occur? Adia, how do you think about that?
Well, I think that's one of the things that separates our program. And I had to do that before because we weren't going to win enough to recruit the 5-star highest level players. So what I did was, and it's very important to me because I was a player. I did it. I went through it. So I knew what I kind of valued and what needed to happen to be successful later. So I really tried to focus on, it's not about the next 4 years. It's about the next 40 plus, or now in the next 5 years, because we're keeping kids for 5 years. So what can we do to separate ourselves? We weren't Gino has 11 championships. Like, I can't compete. He's won about 1,000 more games than me. So I had to say, okay, what can my program do that's different? So I believe that we're one of the best in the country at doing all the other stuff that matter. So to me, a servant leadership matters. To me, you go out in the community, that matters. That's also championship culture. To me, academics matter. So you're not going to come here and just like have a 2.0 and get by. That's not a standard. You won't last in this program. And then to me, little things like preparing you for life. I can't just say to a young woman, be confident. They're like, huh? How are you confident? Like, we're not confident as women, right? So how do I teach them to be confident? Well, I put them in situations where they're uncomfortable. So I always talk about like, be comfortable being uncomfortable. So, and that's, to me, is stuff like speaking engagements. When I was in college, I hated speaking to crowds. I would like die before I'd want to speak to a crowd. But I put them in donor situations where they speak in front of 100 people. Or etiquette class, because then that's preparation to be confident. Then when you're in the situations, you're prepared for them. So off the court, doing all those little things has been a huge part of our culture. But then as recruiting, like Brian said, I have to find people that's interesting to them. Now, if they're just basketball, they probably don't fit my culture. And that's okay with me, because if you can't do all the other things to be well-rounded, I probably don't want to coach you. So it's kind of like those things, and that's this culture, but it's also things that I think are really important to do well in life. You have to give back. You have to know the value of giving back. You have to pull someone else along. You have to do things right, and you have to be a good person. And so I don't think all programs have that. And Brian could probably say the same thing for soccer, but a lot of programs don't care about those things. They care about winning and losing. And I care about winning and losing in every aspect of life. And I think that's what's really separated us.
Brian, what do you think about on this set of topics?
Yeah, I think that's right. I think everyone's got hopefully things that matter to them that have nothing to do with their sport, right? You have there's situations and people background that they go through things, but then there's things that, well, what galvanizes a team, right? Is there things that you want to get behind as a collective, or small groups want to get behind in and around your team? And so there's it's interesting year to year how that changes with it. And we talk about it very much the same thing. It's like, we're in a position of privilege where people pay attention to what we say and what we do. And so, what do you want to do with that? Right. Do you care about that? Does that matter? Not everybody has that same platform, whatever the size is, but it has to come from internally within the guys. I feel really strongly in a lot of areas that if I say, hey, we're doing X, Y, and Z, they may or may not like that as well. But it only goes as far as how I make it happen versus when they come to us and say, we have some really strong opinions on what we want to do. I mean, this year is a good example. We probably had 10, a dozen, organizations reaching out saying, hey, we want to have, your team involved and doing something with a game or doing this. And at the end of the day, you can go too thin on what you want to do, but we really presented it to the team to say, do any of these things matter more than what you want to do yourself? And it was just a platform for them to say, these are the things we really want to voice this year. And then they get behind it. And it's wonderful to see that that is kind of the fun thing about how a team is put together, and that sometimes it's your top performers that get really excited about that stuff. But other times it's guys, that will never see the field that are the real drivers to that thing. And you talk about, you got to have value from every member of your program, right? Staff, player, everyone's got to have value, and how they identify that, and they have to recognize that. We have to sort of, really support those things. But that's one of the really nice pieces in any organization, where the people who really care about this stuff and push it, the amount of respect those guys have internally in our team, who feel passionately about things and can be a driver to get the rest of their teammates involved in those things and excited about them, educated on them, and promoting these things. Like that's kind of the fun of where teams sort of get put together.
One of the things I think about Coach Thompson a lot as a leader myself, and one of the things I admired so much about Coach was his ability to create space to bring the things going on in the outside world into the context of his team, and to give the space to talk about tough stuff. I mean, Brian, you and I have spent time talking about sort of things like the murder of George Floyd and the conversations happening in society over the last years, and how you created the space and how you thought about the team sort of creating space to talk about, to create action on those topics. How has that affected the way you think about culture and this topic of building the whole person and the total leader?
Yeah, I mean, the things that matter, I think, like for the George Floyd situation, Black Lives Matter. It's interesting, we had a really interesting scenario with the 9/11. We had a game on 9/11, and we have a lot of players that kneel during the national anthem, staff members, to still have that conversation going, and it matters hugely to them. And 9/11 was a really interesting crossroads on some things, because 9/11, we played one of our biggest games, played Maryland, a rival, at home on 9/11, the 20-year anniversary of that date. And it led to some unbelievable conversations amongst in-house in our team, because 9/11 for our current players is really a history lesson, right? They weren't around for it, whereas for staff and some older members of our team and the athletic department, like they lived it, they experienced that. And so it was a really powerful week for us going into that. And we had some real conversations about, do we kneel because it's 9/11? Does it mean something else? And trying to educate them on what that means, and then giving them the space to make decisions on it. And we had starters who were said, listen, if we're not kneeling, I'm not starting, right? It matters that much to me. Having those conversations was a huge part of the development of our team. But let them be vulnerable with each other, let them make decisions, but let them really determine in a funny way what they really stood for and why, right? And have those conversations was really powerful for our group. But you got to let them have that space. You got to let them have those conversations. You got to give them the space, as you say. There's a really good word for it. It's creating the space for that to exist, and not just sort of crowding it out with other things and just hoping it kind of happens or doesn't happen.
And the way I experience it on our team is it also helps people understand that you don't have to have consensus and agreement on everything, but the ability to create space for understanding the different perspectives of different people on your team. that makes you a better leader. It makes you a more inclusive leader, long term. And I think it's a huge part of what people like you can do in your roles with young adults. Adia, how do you think about this?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think creating the space where I think as a coach, you have to allow that space and you have to support. I just always try to emphasize that you need to know your reason and you need to understand what you're doing and you need to and be willing to accept the backlash. And that's okay. Because if you feel so strongly about something, I'm going to support whatever it is. I don't care if it's, pretty good decision, but even not my opinion, but I'm going to support what you believe wholeheartedly. But you need to know why you're doing it. You don't just do it because your teammates are doing it. You do it because you believe in it. You don't have the peer pressure to do it. You're making your own choice and that's okay. And people don't have to like it. If you strongly believe it, you fight for what you believe. And me, it's my job to support that. I can have my own beliefs, but it's my job to support my players. And as long as they know why they're doing it and they understand what comes along with doing it. And I think that's a conversation we haven't had yet. We'll start to have that conversation. I think for basketball, it was talked about, but we had, like, as a Pac-12, a lot of us stayed in the locker room. So we didn't really have to address that, and there wasn't fans. It's going to be a completely different story this year, because the reality is, I mean, we're not in like, you're in like Georgetown, very different demographics than Tucson. So Tucson, pretty big military place. So doing that in Tucson, it's going to look different. And that's okay, because if you believe in it, I'm going to fight for you. I'm going to stand by you. And, but just know what that comes with and what that means. And that's just adulting. Like, you have to understand, and that's what's going to happen as an adult. And everybody does not have to like it. You just have to be strong in your beliefs and know why.
Yeah. And I think the communication piece is really where it is, right? Like, having your beliefs, but then communicating that so people and the teammates understand why you do what you do. I mean, we have in any given starting lineup during the national anthem, we'll have 6, 5, 7, 8 players kneel. And that means what? 3, 4, 5, maybe don't kneel, but they all really understand why they don't kneel or why they do, right? They've had those conversations. And I think they're, to a man, will heavily support the other. The kid who's kneeling understands and will support the fellow who's not, and vice versa. And as you say, it's interesting, right? We whenever we go on the road, they're doing it, and so I'm always interested to see or hear if there's backlash to them. But as you say, we'll always have their backs because we understand why they do it, and it matters. It matters to them.
And as a coach, we have to. And sometimes as a coach, you're put in difficult situations because like me, you have to, like, if you get asked, you don't have to explain it, but you have to be able to back things up. And sometimes you realize it's really no one's business, but it's like, you have to be able to handle it as a coach. And that's part of our job. That's why it's not easy being a leader.
Indeed. One of the other things, just to flip the conversation a little bit, you both have talked about recruiting, and obviously your team's turnover, by definition, they turn over all the time. My team turns over all the time. We're hiring tons of people. We're growing. One of the things I wrestle with is we're forming a team with people who have been elite and successful at everything they did before they got to Deloitte, right? They were a 4.X student in this amazing place. They're used to being the peak of their whatever, the peak of their class, the peak of what they are. And you guys are recruiting people who are at the peak of success. They were the best player on their AAU team. They were the best player on their academy team. And guess what? There's not enough space for everyone to be the best when they arrive at an elite institution, whether that's a business institution, it's a sports institution. How do you think about that as you form teams? And how do you think about it in the management and relationships you build with individual players, given that can be a really tough transition for people who are experiencing that phenomenon of not being the best for the first time in their life? I don't know, Adi, if you think about that or how you think about it.
I do think about that. I went through it as a player. I went through that as an All-American in college and got to the pros, and I was barely making teams. So I've been the last player on the bench on some teams. I've been a starter in the pros. very hard. Very hard for me at first, even like my first time being cut, very hard. But I think that it's not about you. The main thing, and we always talk about in our program, the first thing is you accomplish the mission. Our mission is to try to win. And that's what we're trying to do. So what all the decisions we make are in the best interest of the team. It's not about me, it's about the team. And I think that, and then you hold everybody to the standards. So you control, like coaches, we want to win. So you control your playing time, but you have to give us as coaches something we can't live without. So I tell my players, give us something we can't live without. And then you earn playing time, but they control that. You come in prepared and shape. I mean, sometimes the reality that's the hard thing for me is sometimes, like I had an All-American that was really good. And then let's say someone is behind her that works way harder than this All-American. This was probably earlier in her career. The reality was that she could work way harder. She wasn't going to get better than her. Those are the hard situations for me, because you always want to reward the person that works hard, but that's not the reality. Some things aren't fair. It's not all, like some players are just really talented, but I think when you understand that winning's more important, it's not about what the team can do for you, it's about what you can do for the team. And so I think when you understand that, and that's very difficult for women. I mean, women have a very tough time with it. And in our world in basketball, there's 1,100 or something transfers this year. It's insane. So I have a roster of 15. I will lose a couple of people before next year that don't play, or because I always say on my team, I'm probably gonna have 10 unhappy people. The starters will be okay, but then if they play 30 minutes, they're gonna want to play 38. The sixth man's gonna want to start. The other players are gonna wonder why they don't play. So that's just the reality, but you can control that. You work hard and you try to create an advantage. But yeah, that's just how it is in sports. And that's how it is in life. You're gonna face those situations. So you just gotta work.
I will resist the temptation to go on a transfer portal tangent, although I know you both would love to talk about it. But Brian, I know this is something you think about a ton. How do you process that adjustment of the individual to probably an experience in life that many of them have never had?
Yeah, it's a tough one, because if you're really running a really good program, good players come in as young players and they shouldn't be really as good or really ready necessarily, right? And so, we'll always understand, and this goes back to like us recruiting players who really want to come here, because regardless of the scenario, there is something that's going to be really hard for that first year player. Something. A lot of times it's related to sport. A lot of times I'm not playing. Sometimes it's homesick. Sometimes you name it. And there's something that's like for the first time, maybe an incredibly hard thing that they're going through. So hopefully they get through it. Hopefully they use their peers or their coaches to help go through whatever it is, but it's going to be incredibly difficult, and they don't really necessarily know what that is, but it's going to be something. And so, you want them to be feeling like, okay, I'm at the right place and I have the right support structure to figure this out. It's going to be okay. You prepare them for that. You talk to them about it, maybe as recruits. This is going to be tough, but it's exciting. And until you live it, it's incredibly difficult for these guys. To a player on our team, every freshman is going to have a hard experience, some level, and then they persevere through that. Right. That's the fun of that. And so you kind of got to let them know it's going to happen. So they're like, okay, maybe this is my thing. This is the hard part on it. But, the adjustment of it is also, you're hoping that your older, for us seniors, right, are there sort of ready to help them understand this. You're not ready yet, or just be patient. I went through the same thing, right? They've all walked through those steps before. And we'll actually spend time who's going to be talking to who if they need a little bit of help. Sometimes you actually grab a senior, say, hey, maybe go over and talk to so and so. They had a tough day in training today, or they're frustrated about something, and you invariably can pair up somebody who's a junior or senior who had a similar thing that happened to them as a freshman, as a first year, and you can be like, hey, just grab that kid and talk to him on the walk down to the locker room. And just see how they're doing, right? And that's where you're always sort of using the whole support system, be it players or your coaches or whatever, to sort of help guide them through it. because none of them are ready for it. They all think it's going to be fine. They all think the first year they're going to prove it wrong, and they're going to play more, or it's going to be great. And it's the reality of living it is something you can't really prepare for until you're in it.
Well, and that's a good point. So, well, Brian has more of an established program. So for me, what I saw on the shift was we got good pretty fast. So what I saw is some of the players I recruited and started early on, it was kind of like better players are coming in, like Ari came transferred from Washington. Well, she was better than who we had, but then she was going to play right away. So I kind of saw just some interesting dynamics with that, because there was such better players. And now the players that we're able to get, they're not better than the seniors we have, but they're going to compete. So now it's like, I just teach here, you have an advantage. You know the system, you know our defensive, offensive system. You've been here, you know the time management your first year, that's a challenge. But like what I'm seeing is because we're better, faster, these freshmen, some of them are going to really push our seniors, because we're able to get some of the best players in the country. We couldn't get those players 4 years ago. So that's been kind of interesting. And to be honest, in some situations, some players were over-recruited because we were in a certain place, and we lost 3 players last year, but they weren't good enough. But they were good enough when I got the program. They weren't good enough now because better players. So we end up losing players because of that. But that's been just an interesting dynamic to watch.
You said something earlier. You both have talked about the importance of the team leading itself, the importance of seniors. Brian, you talk about one of the things, we get a lot of parents and coaches who will watch and listen to this. I want to hear you talk about how, if captains matter, it's and how you select them. If captains matter, it's interesting. I see teams at the youth level where there isn't a captain. And they've determined that's not important. Most collegiate teams obviously have captains. Some coaches defer to the vote of the team to select the captain. Some coaches couldn't care less about the opinion of the team. Some take the input but make the decisions themselves. Some say it always has to be a senior. Some say, no, it doesn't matter. I want the best leaders. Like maybe Brian first, how do you think about the role of the captain and the process of figuring out what that complement of captains should be?
Yeah, I mean, knowing you, Dan, I think you would probably argue the same point I'm about to make, which is you could make the case that captains are more important than the coaches in a successful team, and maybe not captains, the leaders of the team. If you don't have captains, it's probably because you have good leadership structure somewhere in there to do some things. But the overachievement of a team is related to the captains you have or the leaders you have. The underachievement of a team is related to the captains you have and the seniors you have, more than anything that a coach can do one way or the other, in my opinion. We'll select captains. Our team will vote. We as coaches, we kind of give ourselves a vote and we look at it, and we sort of tiebreakers. I guess we kind of consider ourselves tiebreakers. If you feel like you need tiebreakers, we'll do that. But what I find is the team almost always gets it right. Your team almost always gets it right. And sometimes, the nuances of different areas of leadership gets overlooked. So a lot of times you'll look at it as talent, right? The talent is where people default to for captains. Like players a lot of times will just say, well, this kid's the best player, they're going to be a captain. And talent is, you have to have talent to be in any of our teams right now, right? Like you don't bring in a bad athlete, basketball player or soccer player into these teams. You have to have some talent in there, and the elite talent sometimes gets the nod, or the alpha gets the nod, right? Sometimes the alpha gets the nod, whether they're talented or not. But I tell you, sometimes the alpha isn't the best leader. They're just the loudest and the most, they kind of push their way through things. And those are the ones you get really nervous about, to be fair. But the importance of thinking of different areas of leadership that need to be covered when you're selecting captains matters, right? So who is handling your off the field stuff? Who is handling your social interactions with your community? Like who are the best people for that? Who's the best person at handling your teammates in the locker room? Who's the on-field captain? Those things they're not all the same person a lot of times. Usually they're not. And so it's nice to have those voices empowered when you do that. And so, the selection of it is sort of, I think, you just got to make sure it's the right ones. However you select them, you got to get to the right ones. But we find that the in-house people they know exactly who the ones are. They're going to put them to where they need to win and get the program to the right place.
Adia, how about you? How do you think about it?
Very similar. So it's funny. I never told the team exactly how the voting goes. I just said, I want you to anonymously vote for a captain. But I never said to them, you're going to choose or I'm going to choose. And it's funny because I was just thinking about that. They've never asked. But it's right. At first, I thought there would be a disconnect possibly, but they've always chose who I wanted to choose. There has been one case where there was one player that really, really, really wants to be it. And like for me, I want her to be it. Like I think that she has the qualities. I was trying to mold her and teach her and develop, but there was some disconnect with the team. The team was never voting for her. And so I started to understand, well, it must be something behind the scenes, like in the locker room or something like that. So I'm bringing her along, but I let them vote. And it's been the same two people that I would choose. But being a captain is definitely a privilege, but it should be a burden. It is not something that you take lightly. It should be something that's very heavy on your shoulders, and it is. So the captain has to talk about things that are difficult, has to have uncomfortable conversations, has to lead when it's in the tough times. So I think it's leadership's extremely important. Something I'm doing differently this year, because my first 3 years here, we didn't have a leader. I had to be the leader. I had to take on that role because we didn't have leadership. And it was, and I'm an I personality, like on my assessment, I am a positive energy. My team was all C's. And I was always like, why don't they clap? Like, what the heck? And I realized we did a disc assessment and like, they're all like, they turn inwards and they analyze things. And I was opposite. I was always like, well, the coach does it, you just do it. Like, and they weren't like that. So I became a better coach because I had to learn how to explain things. And to me, that was just a pain in my rear end. I felt like I didn't have to explain stuff. So I had to change and explain, okay, we're doing this rebounding drill. This correlates to the game and we're in a disadvantage and transition or something. I had to explain it, but we got way better. And then I had to be the coach that when I was the leader, had to hold everybody accountable. That was really hard, but we didn't have leadership. Now we have really good leadership. So I'm going to see, I told them the other day that next week they're going to vote on it. But I'm hoping that I choose. Honestly, there's a second person. The second leader is what I'm not sure about yet. We just started practice and there's two that I can choose. I think it gets watered down when there's three of them. I want to choose two. One I know for sure. The second one I'm not positive yet. So I'm waiting until the practice just started. But I think I know, but I'm not sure. And I'm curious right now to see what the team's going to vote. I'm really, really curious to who that second person is that they're going to vote in.
Yeah, it's
I can always override it.
Yeah, it's interesting talking about like, well, you have one that's for sure, and I'm not sure who the second one is. And like, I think it's the same thing. You have to let that happen. It's nice to see if somebody emerges into that role, right? When you give opportunity for people, right? Instead of telling people who's captain, you see who becomes the captain when there's a void, and that's
and
see
who they want and see who they want. But the other thing I did was different. This year, and I've never done this. I wanted other people to have more accountability, so I have them vote, but we assign, and honestly, for some of this, they volunteered. So some of my leaders volunteered for these other areas, which I like. So put someone in charge of the weight room. So skipping reps, not having energy, all that stuff. I put someone in charge of warm-ups because I feel like our warm-ups are very flat. I don't like our warm-ups at all. And so I have a player. So when the warm-ups aren't good, I say to the player, how are our warm-ups? Do we have good energy? Are we attacking this warm-up? She says no. So she does push-ups. The rest of the team doesn't. And so then it's like, okay, your teammates are going to make you do push-ups all day or whatever, running, whatever it is. And then I put someone in charge of like our kitchen area because they should respect that stuff, and our fueling station area. I put someone in charge of like information to the team. And so I chose like 5 or 6 areas. So I'm going to see how that works, but I wanted to give some other emerging leaders some responsibilities and see if they can own those areas and see how they do with it, because then they got to tell the team, okay, clean up your stuff in the locker room, stuff like that. So I'm trying to give more responsibility in that way.
So one of the reasons I love, and my amazing wife, Chrissy, loves Positive Coaching Alliance is because the word positive. And Christy, who's a member of the board of directors in the Mid-Atlantic for PCA and was a collegiate gymnast. Brian's wife, Becky, who was a great athlete. We talk a lot about going to these youth athletic sports, whether it's an AAU game or a soccer game, and being horrified by the environment that exists. Some of it generated by coaches, some of it generated by parents. And, I had an experience in the last 48 hours with, a parent belittling both a referee and their child in a very public way. And it's one of the reasons I love PCA, because they're trying to take on that challenge. I wonder, and Brian, maybe start with you, how you think about whether bringing positivity to the environment in which you live and work every day is important.
Yeah, I mean, it's in this context, there's a few things. Well, let me take a step back. In my own context, I know, and I've been around it long enough that I have enough data points, right, for this, which is if I come in and I'm sour about something, right, I'm in a grouch, you name it, like it can be any reason, right? The players feel that immediately, and the session is always not great. Practice just is like, oh man, that was, and and it doesn't happen too often. I tend to be sort of a glass half full type of a person and a coach, and I tend to, approach a lot of that way, but I also certainly try to make sure, even if I'm not in a good way going out, like I remove any baggage I have, because it's not fair to the team. Like it's the most fun part of our day to be together and do those things. You got to have it, because it's hugely contagious. And that goes into what you're talking about in terms of the youth landscape and these things. And coaches set the tone for everything. Parents set the tone for too much in those things. And I whenever I see my kids do any sports, I just sit and watch, because I'm just like, this is quite fun to go through. And the reality is, even for us as parents, I have 3 children. So, the first one, when she's playing, when she's 10, you sort of perceive it as like 4 years, 5 years more important than she's at always. Right. So it's just everything's a huge deal. And you go through and you got the high school games, you got club games, you got tournament games, you got playoff games that are, at the end of the day, the results are things that if you give it 6 months time, it's really a triviality, right? What you're excited about and you're outraged about with the referee, or it's such a triviality, it's almost embarrassing, right? And so how do you get, parents to do the right thing and coaches to do the right thing we play sport because it's fun at the end of the day, right? And so when we when we have a player who's having a run where they're just not enjoying themselves, then we always ask the question, well, why do you do it? Like, it's not worth doing. If you don't enjoy showing up and playing every day and training every day, you shouldn't play, right? It's not a job. It's something that should be fun. And I think we have to be careful of is when you do look at some of these environments, and this can go for work environment too, by the way, Dan, right? Showing up for work has to be like, we're lucky. I think we love what we do, but
yeah,
it's, I always feel really sad for people when they don't want to get up and go to their job, right? Like that's, for me, is like, oh man, that's, sometimes you have to do it, but can you find something else, or can you find something in your job that's more fun to look forward to? But the same thing applies to when you're looking at the youth sports structure, we put so much pressure on these kids that you have to be really careful. Very quickly becomes something that's not fun. And that can be, that tone can be set very much by any one of those things you're referencing.
Well, and it's not coincidental, Brian, that over my shoulder, as my team has video with me a lot, and 70,000 people are tuning in, that you can see Fun with Purpose. There's a reason that's dominant behind me, because that's the way I want people to think about the privilege we have and the joy we have. And yes, there's a Hoya Saxa Georgetown thing there too, so they get to see that. Adi, I haven't looked up your technical foul percentage over your career, so I don't know about the positivity in that context. But how do you think about this positivity both for yourself and in this broader sports landscape that just seems like it can be pretty caustic at times?
Well, you didn't know I had like 75 technicals? No, I'm just joking. I honestly, when you said that, I honestly am thinking about if I've ever had a technical. I don't think I've ever had a technical.
And Brian's never had a red card.
No, I really, and I'm not, sometimes I've wanted to. No, because for me, it's like, I need to coach them. I'm not a person that, first of all, being positive, loving what you do. I don't have to go to practice. It's a privilege to do what I do. I'm blessed. I'm thankful every day. If I don't love it, I'm going to stop doing it. I don't care about if it's $1 million. I don't care if it's 100,000. So I'm going to love what I do and do it because I love it. But I think it starts with us, and like Brian said, and our body language and stuff. Body language is one of the most important things for me. You can't work with me. You can't play for me with bad body language. I hate it. Because we all have stuff. I have 2 kids. I had a baby right before season. I have a 1-year-old right now. It's hard. There's stuff that happens every day, like me, like this morning, rushing around, like it's life. And I can't go into my job with a bad attitude. I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I just really try hard to not let everybody know what's going on in my life. I mean, I've had miscarriages and coach the next day, and you would have never known. Everybody can't do that, but like, I don't have to wear everything on my sleeves. I got to do my job. And it's like, I'm teaching my kids that there's stuff that happens when you come on this court, like you forget about stuff. This is where that this can be an outlet for you. And I think what's going on with youth basketball is just a disgrace. I think it's sad. And I've also learned as a coach, I'm not recruiting a kid with crazy parents. Earlier, I probably would take that chance more because I didn't understand. And now I don't recruit that because I'm recruiting the whole family. I don't want the phone calls all the time. I don't want that. I want good people that come from good places. I also have a kid that plays sports. I want to coach my kid a little bit last week. I watched his first basketball game. I was like, oh gosh, he's awful. But he's loving it. He's jumping around doing Ninjago kicks on the side while he's running. Who cares? It's like he's supposed to love and have fun and find what his passion is. It might not be basketball, but I watched my son is 6, and I watched parents go. My husband and I are there. We both coach. We watched parents go to the bench, and I was kind of like, I was ticked. I'm like, you don't need to coach. Like they're 6 years old. They like, my son is bad. It's okay. I could teach him to love it, try to get him lessons. I could try to coach him, but if he's having fun, that's what matters. But I think that us being positive, and I don't feel like in a game that me screaming at the ref, that's not going to get me any more calls. So I am more like, well, I talk more because as a coach, I didn't respond well when coaches were just screaming. I just didn't listen. I just said, So I might say something honest that they don't like, but I just I feel like brutal honesty is better in coaching. I'm not saying you don't raise your voice, but I just feel like you have to coach them. And if I just yell, I'm not coaching.
So Adia, one of the things that people say about you is that you're an authentic leader. And by the way, people say that about me. And oftentimes when I hear that, I'm like, why is that so unique? Yeah. That one of us in one of these sort of quote senior positions is authentic. I remember, reading a tweet from you, before the Final Four about getting spit up on and pooped on. There was attention, I think, incredibly beautiful attention to you being a breastfeeding mother who was dealing with that in the Final Four. Like, how do you think about authenticity as a leader, and why do you think that comes across as being so unique when you're just being who you are and I'm just being who I am?
Well, I didn't really understand that. I didn't really know that like so much stuff was taboo. I think that I've been in this world, right? So I was an athlete, a pro athlete for 13 years. And then I went into coaching right after I played. And so I feel like there's so many things that I felt like, first of all, I probably didn't have a lot of friends with kids at the time because all my friends were playing. But I didn't know that so much stuff is like something that you're not supposed to say or you're not supposed to do. I didn't even understand that was such a reality, to be honest. Like in a perfect world, I would not have pumped during a national championship game, but we had media obligations. I couldn't control that. Now, did I want 5 million people to find out about it? No, I didn't share that, but they found out. But I was like, yeah, and like I figured that's like a part of life. And I didn't even understand until I was doing it that I was the only one with like a top program that had a newborn baby. I just thought like, well, when we coach, these are the years we have kids, like this is kind of what comes along with the territory. So when I was asked a lot of things, I was like, yeah. And I wasn't afraid to talk about it because that's the reality. And I feel like it's something, what I'm doing is my players they get to see me with 7 bags, carrying through the airport. They get to see me pumping on the side. That's the reality. If they want to do what I do one day, they're going to probably have to do that. And to me, it's just sad that there hasn't been the space, and there hasn't been support for women and women's basketball. To me, that's just like, I'm just surprised. And a lot of stuff was brought to light, or a lot of people said, "Well, I couldn't do this," and I was like, "Wow." I just think a lot of things need to change. And I'm glad that I was able to be a voice, and I didn't even realize that some of these issues were issues. And so I just have to be me. I can't be someone else. I'm not going to try to be someone else. And if I have a job where I can't be me, that's not the right job for me. I'll leave. So for me, it's I have to be who I am, and I'm not apologetic for what I'm doing, because what I'm doing is beautiful.
Love it. So before we sort of wrap up with a couple final thoughts, Brian, I have to give you the chance to give Adia some advice.
Yeah.
Given you went from the first Final Four appearance, you won the Final Four game as she did, and then lost in a nail biter, each of you by one goal in soccer, 1 point in basketball in the national final. And Brian, you won your national championship 6 years later. How can she have that same success, or probably do it much quicker and with more fun than you were able to?
Adia sounds like somebody like, I mean, no wonder people love playing for her, right? Like the genuine nature. Like, I'm just like, oh, that's someone you want to play for. It's like you have real conversations, and I don't know. I think that's not an undervalued thing there. I think you talk about championship culture. One of the things when you talk about championship culture that helps is the familiarity of winning, right? And we when it's not novel, that takes away something that's nice in a way, right? The fun of the first run is something that's like, well, this is the first time we've ever been here. There's something really special about that experience for the coaches and the players, right? There's like, we're doing something we won again. No one thought we could do that. We won again. No, we thought we could do that. And then we might win the whole thing. And the real value of a championship culture is the familiarity for people back in. Now, when the thing is we screwed it up a bunch of times after. So we had teams.
Yeah, but how hard was the next year? Like with now the targets on your back, now everybody, like, how hard was that? Because that's what I'm.
Yeah. So, okay. So two things, right? Two things. In answer to your question, hard, because your players and your coaches will in some ways feel like you have it cracked, right? Like we did it. We're just a point away. We should have won it. We have it cracked. The reality is it's a very different nut now, right? So the fact that you're now dealing with teams that are super excited to have you in, you're going to have the biggest crowds you've ever played in front of on the road. You're going to have fans that are going to wonder why you didn't play that well that game now at home. They're going to have expectations that are, if you don't like winning is hard, but everyone expects you to win now, right? And when you don't win, everyone's like, well, what's wrong? So, well, it's just the sport. But I think the reality is, and the thing that I think we learned from the 2013 year, which is the year after we went to the final. So even though we didn't win, it took us a while to sort of get up to speed again, because there was a general, it's not a malaise. There was a general, what are our rules? Well, what worked last year works again. So we're not thinking about our rules. What are our standards? Well, what worked last year, that works. So we'll do that again. There was never a conscious raising of the bar to higher standards than what you had the year before, right? What's different about our team? What are we going to do better than last year's team? And that for me as a coach was a huge mistake. We didn't demand it. I was happy with the guys saying, well, what we did last year, let's do that again. And that I think for us was the biggest challenge, was them understanding it's harder. It's just harder, right? The challenge is not the same. It's harder, but you're up for it. What you learn along the way, like you'll find out about that as you go. And this is whether your team is able to make the micro adjustments needed this year as you go, or not, right? That's the first thing. But the second thing was when we got back there, I was the only person as a player, because as I say, we screwed up in 13 and 14 and 15. And like, we had teams that should have gotten back there and we kept losing in the quarterfinals or the Sweet 16 or whatever. But when we got back there, we were very much able to use our experience the time before to prepare for the journey again, right? So the Final Four weekend is a different thing,
yeah,
right?
Totally.
It's a different thing than you've ever experienced, and going through it once, you know how to prepare for it going into it the second time. So we had a huge amount of time where we prepped on meetings and stuff. And I was the only person on our staff that had done it before. Assistants were all new. No players had been there before. So I had to go through and be like, this is what it feels like. This is how we're preparing for it. And we had a lot of, thought about, what we have to do differently to prepare for what's going to come when you win. That was the difference in it, is we never looked past the semifinal the first time. We're like, that game's only matters. And this time, the second time, we're like, well, we want to win the whole thing. So we're planning for winning the semifinal. What's happened? We talked about what happens after the game on Friday. We talked about what happens in between games on Saturday. We talked about what happens before the game on Sunday. And we prepared the team for that. We openly discussed that with the players, so they knew what to do to expect once they won over the run of the weekend, because it's just different, something they've never had before.
Yeah. Wow,
So, Adia, that sounds like an invitation for Brian to come talk to your team at some point. If there's a little trough in the season, and we might, heaven forbid, we have a 2-game losing streak. So let me close. Let me close with this, which is, you heard me say earlier, I think about myself as a leader in training every day, and I actually seek information and inspiration from lots of leaders who aren't doing the kinds of leading I'm doing and running a big, company. I believe it or not, people like you, I get, perhaps the most inspiration and ideas from. I've got a couple brothers who have a small business that inspire me. How do you learn, and who do you observe or learn from as you are a coach in training or a leader in training? Maybe Adia, start with you.
I turn to people who I really respect, and they're just different. One person that I love and who was a coach for me in the WNBA, who I've known for many years, and who's a brilliant basketball mind, is Jenny Busek. She's now coaching in the NBA. I learned a lot with USA Basketball. That was a great experience for me. I think one of the things that I loved about it was everybody was like, you didn't have to say go hard, or you didn't have to say, do this. They were all so hungry and so eager to learn at the highest level. And that was just fun to be around. And so I think it taught me a lot, and it was good for me to see another successful program, Dawn, and how she runs things, how she does it, because we did a lot of things differently, which is good, but it taught me like, oh, I kind of like that, just different things I took from there, but constantly learning from different people. I'm asking questions, talking to people. I feel like I'm in training like you. I don't know it all. And the thing is, I want to be better. Like every day I'm trying to do something better. So I talked to my team about being 1% better. Well, right now, like my 1% better is, I'm trying to be more active, and I'm trying to lose this baby weight. Like, I don't want this baby weight anymore. I'm like over it. So now that's taking, like, I'm trying to hit my 10,000 steps every day. So I'm trying to be 1% better in everything I do, coaching. Last year I made a lot of mistakes, and I make mistakes, but I try to learn from it. And I'm not afraid to say, hey, my bad when I did something. I don't think I know everything. I say that wasn't the best thing. I'm not afraid to be accountable for what I do and own it. So
love it.
Get better.
Brian, what's the short version of your answer to this?
I love talking to my peers, right? And my friends, the people can be honest with me, right? I mean, have honest conversations. Like, I think that's, Jamie Clark at UW at Washington, good friend of mine, and he's running an unbelievable team right now, but we barely ever see each other on opposite ends of the country. To this, I love talking to him because he just thinks about the game so different, and he's super honest. And I talk to my favorite calls every week is my old assistants who are head coaches, right? Coach Gill at Penn and Brian Gill at Penn and Zach Samuel at American University. And just because I was like, how's it going over there? What are your issues going on? And they got issues, and they like hearing about our issues, and I like hearing about theirs. And but just, people that you can have genuine conversations and honest conversations about what's happening and what they're going through. And you learn a ton when you're open to talking to your peers. Yeah.
And you have to have that group, because they say it's lonely at the top. You don't have a ton of friends, and you compete against a lot of your acquaintances. So you need to have that support group, and it's very important, I think.
Yeah. Yeah.
Totally.
And they need to tell you, like, what are you doing? Right.
Yeah.
What are you thinking? Right. You need those guys who can say, like, what on earth are you thinking with that? And that's you need those people.
Well, and
resonates with me. I don't have a lot of friends either, Adia. So it's the three of us have that in common. Though, Adia, you probably don't follow men's college soccer every day. Brian referenced Jamie Clark. At this moment, Brian and the person he goes to for advice are the number 2 ranked teams in the country. So that's pretty.
Birds of a feather flock together. You always
pretty
say
surreal.
Your matters who you keep your company with, right?
And again, thanks to Positive Coaching Alliance, I'll give you a personal thought, which is, I have children who are athletes, and my oldest is a collegiate soccer player, girl. And probably the most important thing to Christy and I was that she ended up with a positive coach.
Yeah.
And she did. And it's Jen Clark out at Claremont McKenna, who Brian knows, and parents and folks care about what people like the two of you stand for. So I know it's been a super interesting conversation with me. I've learned a lot. I hope we've created a relationship between two of the great coaches in the NCAA who are at different sides of the country and playing different sports, but have a lot in common. Marty, I'll give it back to you if you want to have any closing thoughts, but thanks for bringing the three of us together.
Thank you.
Wow, what an amazing conversation. I just want to reiterate the things that Dan shared. Thank you all for joining us today. The expertise and wisdom that you shared has made us all better leaders, better coaches, better parents, better colleagues. So we just really appreciate your time, coaches, and your expertise. And Dan, thank you so much. We appreciate our partnership with Deloitte. This conversation has been recorded and will be available for those who tuned in today and took the time to tune in. We appreciate it. And thank you for being here. We'll see you at the next webinar. Have a great day.
Good luck, Brian, this year.